The wind whispers through the Kentucky woodlands, carrying tales long forgotten by time. Today, we uncover one such tale. From the misty hills of Blackwood County, a place that no longer appears on any modern map. This is the story of Eliza Blackwood and the crows that followed her. A story of a village swallowed by shadows and secrets in the year 1849. Welcome to Roots of Fear. The winter of 1849 was particularly harsh in Kentucky. The Cumberland Mountains stood like silent sentinels, their peaks disappearing into clouds heavy with snow. Nestled between those ancient hills was the small settlement of Ravenbrook, a village of no more than 60 souls. The community survived on what the land provided: corn, tobacco, and the occasional wild game that wandered too close to their hunting grounds. Ravenbrook was founded some 30 years prior by Jonathan Blackwood, a man fleeing debts in Virginia with dreams of carving out his own domain in the wilderness. He succeeded in his way, though the village never grew beyond a cluster of wooden structures surrounding a modest church. The Blackwood family became the de facto leaders of Ravenbrook, their home standing larger than the others, situated on a small hill overlooking the settlement. By 1849, Jonathan was long dead, buried in the small cemetery behind the church he had commissioned. His son, Thomas Blackwood, had taken his place as the head of the community. Thomas was a stern man with a heavy brow and calloused hands, a man of the land who spoke little and expected much. His wife Sarah had died bringing their daughter into the world 12 years prior. That daughter was Eliza. Eliza Blackwood was not like the other children of Ravenbrook. While they played games of tag between chores or skipped stones across the creek that ran through the village, Eliza preferred solitude. She would often be found at the edge of the woods, sitting silent as stone, watching, always watching. The villagers whispered that she had her mother's eyes, dark as coal, and seeing things others could not. Thomas did not know what to make of his quiet daughter. He had expected a son to carry on his name and work the fields alongside him. Instead, he was left with a slip of a girl who seemed more shadow than child. He did his best in his way, teaching her to read from the family Bible and ensuring she knew her letters and numbers, but there remained a distance between them, a gulf neither knew how to cross. Eliza's only true companion was her grandmother, Abigail Blackwood, who lived with them in the family home. Abigail was the oldest resident of Ravenbrook. Her face a map of wrinkles, her hands gnarled like tree roots. She moved slowly, leaning heavily on a walking stick carved from blackthorn, but her mind remained sharp as a tack, and her eyes, though clouded with cataracts, missed little. It was Abigail who first noticed Eliza's peculiar habit. The old woman had woken before dawn, as was her custom, and spotted her granddaughter slipping out the back door with a small pouch clutched in her hands. Curious, Abigail had followed at a distance, watching as Eliza made her way to the edge of the woods. There, in a small clearing, Eliza had opened the pouch and scattered its contents on the ground. Corn kernels, breadcrumbs, and small pieces of meat saved from her own dinner. Then she had sat on a fallen log and waited, humming a tune Abigail did not recognize. The crows had come within minutes. First one, then three, then a dozen or more. Black wings against the pale morning sky. They descended into the clearing like ink drops on parchment. They gathered around Eliza, pecking at the offering she had brought, and Eliza watched them, her expression serene, almost reverent. What surprised Abigail most was not the crow's appearance. Such birds were common enough in these parts, but their behavior. They showed no fear of the girl. Indeed, several perched on the log beside her, while one brave bird landed upon her shoulder, its beak close to her ear as if whispering secrets. Abigail had not disturbed the scene, retreating to the house before Eliza could spot her. But that evening, as they sat by the fire, while Thomas was out at the meeting house discussing the coming planting season with the other men, she broached the subject. "I saw you with the crows this morning," Abigail said, her knitting needles clicking steadily in her lap. Eliza's head snapped up, her dark eyes wide with alarm. "Are you going to tell father?" Abigail considered the question. Thomas was not a superstitious man, not like some in the village, but he was practical to a fault and would see no value in wasting food on wild birds. "That depends," she said carefully. "How long have you been feeding them?" "Since winter began," Eliza admitted. "They were hungry, grandmother. The snow covered everything. Birds have survived winters long before you came along, child. These ones are different." Eliza's voice dropped to a whisper. "They talk to me." Abigail's hand stilled. In her 73 years, she had heard many strange tales. Growing up, her own grandmother had told stories of the old country, where birds were sometimes messengers from the other world. Such beliefs had no place in the church that stood at the center of Ravenbrook, but they lingered nonetheless, passed down in whispers and half tales. "What do they say?" Abigail asked, her voice equally soft. Eliza hesitated, glancing toward the window as if afraid the birds might be listening. "They tell me things about people, about what happens when no one is watching." A chill ran down Abigail's spine that had nothing to do with the winter air seeping through the cabin walls. Such as, "They told me that Mr. Fletcher beats his wife when he drinks. That Mrs. Chambers steals eggs from the miller's hen house, that Reverend Stokes visits the widow Parker at night and calls it pastoral care." Eliza's face remained impassive as she recited these secrets, as if reading from a list. Abigail's breath caught. These were indeed secrets, things a child of 12 should have no way of knowing. Yet they rang true. She had suspected Tobias Fletcher's violent nature for years. Had noticed Hannah Miller's complaints about missing eggs, had observed the way the Reverend looked at the young widow during Sunday services. "The crows see everything," Eliza continued. "They fly over the village all day. They watch from the trees. They remember and they tell me." "Why you?" Abigail asked, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. Eliza shrugged, a curiously adult gesture on her small frame. "They say I have the sight, like Mother did." This revelation struck Abigail like a physical blow. Sarah Blackwood had indeed possessed an uncanny intuition, a knack for knowing things she shouldn't. Some in the village had whispered which behind her back, though never within Thomas's hearing. Abigail had dismissed such talk as jealousy and ignorance. Now she wondered. "You must be careful, Eliza," she said at last. "People fear what they don't understand. If they knew you spoke with crows." "I know," Eliza said. "The crows told me that, too. They said people killed a girl in Salem for less a long time ago." The mention of Salem sent another chill through Abigail. Those trials had occurred over a century and a half ago, but their shadow still loomed large in the collective memory. "Promise me you'll be discreet," Abigail said, reaching out to grasp Eliza's small hand. "Feed your birds if you must, but speak of this to no one else." Eliza nodded solemnly. "I promise, grandmother." And so, a secret pact was formed between the old woman and the young girl, a pact sealed in the flickering firelight of a Kentucky winter's night. Neither could have known the darkness that would follow, a darkness as black as a crow's wing. As February gave way to March, the harsh grip of winter began to loosen. The snow receded, revealing muddy ground beneath. The creek that had been frozen solid for months began to flow again, its surface breaking apart in great sheets of ice that crashed against the banks. Spring was coming to Ravenbrook. With the changing season came a change in the village's mood. Winter had been difficult. Food stores had run low, and illness had claimed 2 of their number. Old Mr. 3. Harrison, who had caught a chill that settled in his lungs, and the Cooper infant, born too early and too frail for this harsh world. But now, there was work to be done. Fields to plow, seeds to sow, repairs to make to buildings damaged by winter storms. Thomas Blackwood threw himself into this work with grim determination. The previous year's harvest had been poor, and as the head of the village, he felt the responsibility keenly. He spent long days in the fields, returning home after dark, his clothes caked with mud, his face lined with exhaustion. Eliza continued her secret feedings of the crows. Indeed, their numbers seemed to grow as spring advanced. Where once she had fed a dozen birds, now 30 or more gathered in the clearing each morning. The villagers began to notice the unusual concentration of crows in the area, commenting on it during Sunday services or while trading at the small general store. "Never seen so many of those devil birds," Tobias Fletcher remarked one day, spitting a stream of tobacco juice onto the ground. "Bad omen, if you ask me." "Nobody asked you, Tobias," Thomas replied curtly. He had little patience for superstition. Birds go where there's food. Must be more worms. And such this year. But others were not so easily reassured. The crows were becoming bolder, perching on rooftops and fence posts, watching the villagers with their shiny black eyes. Children claimed the birds followed them as they walked to and from the small schoolhouse. Women reported finding feathers on their doorsteps, black as night, and appearing as if deliberately placed. Reverend Stokes, a thin man with a perpetual frown, devoted an entire sermon to the birds, drawing from Leviticus to declare crows unclean creatures, detestable in the eyes of the Lord. "These birds of darkness are harbingers of misfortune," he announced from his pulpit, his voice rising as he warmed to his theme. "They feed on carrion and corruption. Their presence in such numbers can only be a sign of God's displeasure." Sitting in the front pew beside her father and grandmother, Eliza kept her face carefully blank, but her hands hidden in the folds of her dress clenched into tight fists. The crows were not evil. They were her friends, her confidants. They brought her gifts sometimes. A pretty pebble, a shiny button lost by someone in the village. Once even a silver thimble that she had hidden beneath a loose floorboard in her room. After the service, as the congregation filed out into the watery sunshine, Eliza felt eyes upon her. Turning, she found herself face to face with Mercy Fletcher, Tobias's daughter. Mercy was 16, tall and angular, with pale blonde hair and eyes the color of a winter sky. The two girls had never been friends. Mercy considered herself too grown up to associate with a 12-year-old. But now, she looked at Eliza with undisguised hostility. "It's you, isn't it?" Mercy said, her voice pitched low so others wouldn't hear. "You're the reason those birds are everywhere." Eliza felt a flutter of panic in her chest. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, attempting to step around the older girl. Mercy blocked her path. "I've seen you sneaking out in the mornings. I followed you once. Saw you feeding them, talking to them like they could understand you." Her lip curled in disgust. "My paw says only witches commune with crows. Your paw drinks too." Much and hits your ma, Eliza replied before she could stop herself. The crows told me. The color drained from Mercy's face. You're lying, she hissed. But there was fear in her eyes now. You making that up? The same way you're making up stories about me and the crows, Eliza countered, finding courage in the older girl's discomfort. Eliza. Thomas Blackwood's voice cut through their conversation. He stood a few paces away, frowning at the two girls. Come along now. Your grandmother is waiting. With a final glance at Mercy's pale face, Eliza hurried to her father's side. As they walked away, she could feel Mercy's eyes boring into her back like daggers. That night, Eliza dreamt of crows, hundreds of them. Thousands, their wings beating like thunder, their voices a cacophony of calls and screams. In the dream, they circled Ravenbrook around and around, drawing closer with each pass until they descended upon the village in a black whirlwind. She woke gasping, her nightgown damp with sweat. The next morning, she went to the clearing as usual, her pouch filled with offerings. But as she scattered the food on the ground, a sense of unease settled over her. Something was different. The forest was too quiet, the air too still. And when the crows came, they seemed agitated, hopping from foot to foot, their cries harsher than usual. One bird, larger than the others, with a white feather in its wing, landed directly in front of her. It fixed her with its obsidian eye and let out a single sharp call that sent the other birds into a frenzy of activity. They circled above her, their calls a discordant chorus. What's wrong? Eliza asked, her voice barely a whisper. The white, feathered crow cocked its head, opened its beak, and spoke, not in a human voice, but in a series of caws and clicks that nonetheless formed words in Eliza's mind. Danger coming, it seemed to say. Blood in the air, death on the wind. Before Eliza could ask more, the crow took flight, joining its brethren in their circling dance above. Then, as one, they flew off toward the village. A river of black wings flowing through the trees. Heart pounding, Eliza followed, running as fast as her legs would carry her. She emerged from the woods to find the crows settled on every available perch in Ravenbrook. Rooftops, fence posts, the steeple of the church. The villagers stood in the street pointing and exclaiming, their faces masks of fear and confusion. At the center of it all stood Reverend Stokes, his black coat making him look like a crow himself. He held a Bible aloft, his lips moving in what appeared to be prayer or exorcism. Beside him stood Mercy Fletcher, her finger pointed directly at Eliza as she emerged from the tree inn. There she is! Mercy cried. The witch who commands the birds. All eyes turned to Eliza. Time seemed to slow as she stood frozen at the edge of the village, the weight of those stairs pressing down upon her like stones. Then her father was there, pushing through the crowd to stand between her and their accusing eyes. What nonsense is this? He demanded, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. Your daughter consorts with these foul creatures, Reverend Stokes said, his thin face flushed with righteous fervor. Mercy Fletcher witnessed her feeding them, speaking with them, and now they descend upon our village like a plague. Is this true, Eliza? Thomas asked, turning to look at his daughter. Eliza opened her mouth to deny it, but the words stuck in her throat. She had promised her grandmother to be discreet, but she had not promised to lie, and somehow she knew the crows would not respect a liar. I feed them, she admitted softly. They are hungry, especially in winter. But I don't command them. They are just birds. A collective gasp went up from the crowd. Thomas's face hardened, his jaw clenching. Birds, he repeated. Nothing more? Then why do they gather so? Reverend Stokes challenged. Why do they watch us with such intelligence? I tell you, these are not natural birds. They are vessels for something darker. Vessels for witchcraft, someone in the crowd called out. For Satan himself, added another voice. Thomas raised his hands. Enough. My daughter is a child, not a witch. She has shown kindness to creatures of God's making, nothing more. Would you condemn her for that? A moment of uncertainty rippled through the gathering. Thomas Blackwood was respected in Ravenbrook, his word carrying weight. But fear is a powerful force, and superstition runs deep in isolated communities. If she is innocent, Reverend Stokes said, his voice silky with challenge, then let her prove it. Let her send these birds away. If they obey her command to leave, does that not show an unnatural control? And if they don't leave, Thomas countered, then perhaps we have all overreacted. The Reverend conceded with a thin smile that did not reach his eyes. Thomas turned to Eliza. Can you make them go? He asked quietly. Eliza looked up at the crows, their black forms stark against the pale spring sky. Could she send them away? She had never tried to command them before. They came when she fed them, listened when she spoke, but they were wild creatures with wills of their own. Yet, as she gazed at them now, she felt a connection, a thread of understanding running between her and the birds. They had come to warn her, to protect her perhaps, and now they were putting her in danger. Please, she whispered, looking directly at the white, feathered crow perched on the church steeple. Please go. For a long moment, nothing happened. The crows remained in place, their beady eyes fixed on the gathered villagers. Then, with a sound like thunder, they took flight all at once. Hundreds of black wings beating the air. Hundreds of throats calling out in a deafening chorus. They circled once, twice, 3 times over the village, then flew off toward the mountains, a dark cloud against the sky. Silence fell over Ravenbrook as the last echoes of cawing faded away. The villagers looked at each other, then at Eliza, uncertainty written on their faces. She sent them away, someone murmured. They obeyed her. Another added. Reverend Stokes's face darkened as Satan's minions would obey their mistress, he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet street. Or as God's creatures respond to kindness, came another voice, Abigail Blackwood's. The old woman made her way through the crowd, a walking stick tapping a steady rhythm on the packed earth. My granddaughter has done nothing wrong. She has shown compassion to hungry birds in winter. If that is a sin, then I fear we have all misunderstood the teachings of our Lord. The Reverend's mouth twisted as if he had tasted something sour. But before he could respond, Thomas spoke again. This matter is closed. He said firmly, my daughter will no longer feed the crows if it disturbs the village. Though, now we all have work to do. The fields won't plow themselves. Slowly, reluctantly, the crowd dispersed. Reverend Stokes lingered, his gaze fixed on Eliza with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Then he too turned away, his black coat flapping like wings as he strode toward the church. Thomas placed a hand on Eliza's shoulder, guiding her toward home. Abigail followed, her steps slow but determined. None of them spoke until they were inside with the door firmly closed. You should have told me, Thomas said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Sneaking out, feeding wild birds. Did you not think how it would look? I'm sorry, Father, Eliza said, her eyes downcast. "I didn't mean any harm." "Harm comes whether we mean it or not," Thomas replied. "You've given the village cause to talk, to suspect. That's dangerous, Eliza." "The girl meant well," Abigail interjected, lowering herself carefully into her chair by the fire. "And she's put an end to it now. The birds are gone." "For how long?" Thomas asked. "They'll be back if they think there's food to be had." "I won't feed them anymore," Eliza promised, though the words felt like stones in her mouth. "I'll stay away from them," Thomas sighed, the anger draining from him, leaving only weariness in its wake. "See that you do. I don't want to hear any more talk of crows or witchcraft in this house or in this village. Is that understood?" Eliza nodded, blinking back tears. That night, as she lay in her small bed beneath the eaves, Eliza listened for the crows. In the weeks since she had begun feeding them, she had grown accustomed to their occasional calls in the darkness. A reminder that they were near, watching over her. But tonight, the world outside her window was silent. They had gone just as she had asked. A tear slid down her cheek, followed by another. She had not realized how much their presence had come to mean to her. How the thought of their watchful eyes had comforted her, made her feel less alone in a village where she had never quite belonged. "Come back," she whispered into the darkness. "Please come back." But the night remained silent, and eventually, Eliza drifted into an uneasy sleep. The next week passed in a strange calm. The crows did not return, and gradually the villagers' suspicious glances faded. Life in Ravenbrook resumed its normal rhythms, men in the fields, women tending gardens and households, children at their lessons or chores. Spring advanced, bringing with it warmer days and the first green shoots in the newly plowed earth. Eliza went through the motions of her daily life like a sleepwalker. She attended the small school 3 days a week, helped her grandmother with household tasks, read from the family Bible in the evenings as her father expected, but she felt hollow inside, as if something essential had been carved out of her. The crows had been her secret, her special connection to a world beyond the confines of Ravenbrook. Without them, she was just a strange, quiet girl in a village that valued conformity above all else. Abigail watched her granddaughter with concern. The spark had gone out of Eliza's eyes, leaving them dull as tarnished coins. She ate little, spoke less, and sometimes Abigail would find her standing at the edge of the woods, staring into the trees as if waiting for something that never came. On Sunday, a week after the incident in the village, Reverend Stokes devoted his sermon to the story of the prodigal son, the tale of a young man who strayed from the path of righteousness, only to be welcomed back into the fold upon his repentance. His eyes found Eliza repeatedly as he spoke of sin and redemption, his meaning clear to all who watched. After the service, as the congregation filed out into the spring sunshine, the Reverend made a point of stopping Thomas Blackwood. "Your daughter seems troubled," he observed, his voice carrying just far enough for those nearby to hear. "Perhaps she would benefit from more direct spiritual guidance. I could call at your home. Speak with her privately about the dangers that beset young souls." Before Thomas could respond, Abigail cut in. "My granddaughter receives ample guidance from her family, Reverend, but we thank you for your concern." The Reverend's smile did not reach his eyes. "As you wish, Mrs. Blackwood. But my door is always open should the need arise." As they walked home, Eliza trailing slightly behind her father and grandmother, she felt a familiar prickling sensation at the back of her neck. The feeling of being watched. She turned, scanning the trees that bordered the village, but saw nothing out of the ordinary, just branches swaying in the breeze, shadows shifting as clouds passed overhead. Yet the feeling persisted throughout the day, intensifying as dusk fell. That night, Eliza lay awake long after her father and grandmother had retired, listening to the creaks and groans of the old house settling. The feeling of being observed had not abated. If anything, it had grown stronger with the darkness. Rising from her bed, she moved to the window and peered out into the night. The moon was nearly full, casting a silver light over the village and the woods beyond. At first, she saw nothing unusual, just the familiar shapes of buildings, the empty street, the dark line of trees. Then a movement caught her eye. A flicker of something darker than the night itself moving among the trees at the edge of the woods. Squinting, Eliza tried to make out what it was. A deer, perhaps? A bear? But as she watched, the shape resolved itself into a human figure, tall and thin, moving with deliberate steps along the tree. A chill ran down Eliza's spine as she recognized the distinctive silhouette of Reverend Stokes, his long coat billowing slightly in the night breeze. What was the Reverend doing at the edge of the woods at this hour? The parsonage was on the other side of the village near the church. There was no reason for him to be here, creeping about in the darkness like a thief, unless he was watching the Blackwood house, watching her. The thought sent another chill through Eliza. She shrank back from the window, her heart hammering in her chest. For a moment, she considered waking her father, telling him what she had seen. But what proof did she have? The Reverend would simply deny it, claim he had been taking a late-night constitutional, or attending to some parish business. Besides, Thomas had made it clear he wanted no more trouble. If Eliza started making accusations against the Reverend, it would only bring more attention, more suspicion down upon her head. So, she said nothing. Returning to her bed, where she lay sleepless until dawn painted the sky with pale fingers of light. When she finally rose, hollow-eyed and exhausted, she found her grandmother already up, kindling the fire for breakfast. "You look like you've seen a ghost, child," Abigail remarked, studying Eliza's face with concern. "I couldn't sleep," Eliza replied, helping to set the table for the morning meal. "Bad dreams." Abigail's gnarled hand reached out to smooth a strand of hair from Eliza's forehead. "Want to tell me about them?" Eliza hesitated. Her grandmother had always been her confidant, the one person in Ravenbrook who seemed to understand her, but even Abigail had advised caution, discretion. Would she believe that the Reverend was spying on them? Or would she dismiss it as a child's imagination working overtime? Before she could decide, Thomas entered the kitchen, bringing with him the smell of the stable where he had already been to tend to their horse and milk the cow. "Storm brewing," he announced, serving himself a bowl of the porridge Abigail had prepared. "Sky's the color of a bruise to the west. Might want to bring in the washing early, mother." The moment for confidence passed. Eliza ate her breakfast in silence, her thoughts churning like the approaching storm clouds. Something was wrong in Ravenbrook. Something beyond a preacher's late-night wanderings or a village's superstitious fear of crows. She could feel it in the air. A tension like the moment before lightning strikes. After breakfast, Thomas departed for the fields, determined to get as much work done as possible before the storm hit. Abigail set about her household tasks while Eliza was assigned to gather eggs from the hen house and then help with the washing. As she crossed the yard to the small wooden structure where their 6 hens nested, Eliza glanced toward the woods. In the daylight, they seemed less threatening. Just trees and undergrowth, home to squirrels and rabbits and birds. But the memory of the Reverend's shadowy figure lingered, making her skin crawl. The henhouse door creaked as she pulled it open. Inside, the familiar smell of straw and chicken droppings greeted her, along with the soft clucking of hens. Eliza moved to the nesting boxes, reaching beneath warm feathered bodies to extract the eggs they guarded. She had collected 4 when a sound from outside made her freeze. A soft call, almost tentative. Setting down her basket, Eliza moved to the small window, cut into the henhouse wall, and peered out. There, perched on the fence that enclosed their vegetable garden, was a crow. Its feathers gleamed blue-black in the morning light, and its head was tilted as if an inquiry. As Eliza watched, it let out another soft call. Joy surged through her, bright and fierce. They had not abandoned her after all. Glancing toward the house to ensure her grandmother wasn't watching, Eliza slipped out of the henhouse and approached the fence. "You came back," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. The crow bobbed its head, its black eyes fixed on her face. Then it opened its beak and dropped something onto the fence post. A small shiny object that caught the light. With another caw, the bird took flight, circling once over Eliza's head before disappearing into the trees. Curious, Eliza moved closer to the fence, standing on tiptoe to see what the crow had left. It was a button, she realized, a small silver button such as might come from a man's waistcoat. It looked old, tarnished in places with an intricate pattern etched into its surface. As she reached for it, a voice spoke from behind her, nearly causing her to topple over in surprise. "What have you found there, Eliza?" Spinning around, Eliza found herself face to face with Reverend Stokes. He stood just beyond the garden gate, his hands clasped behind his back. His thin face set in an expression of polite interest. But his eyes, when they met hers, were cold and calculating. "Nothing, Reverend," Eliza said, her hand closing around the button. "Just a pretty stone." Indeed, the Reverend took a step closer, his gaze flicking to her closed fist. "May I see this stone?" Panic fluttered in Eliza's chest. If she showed him the button, he would know she had lied. If she refused, he would be even more suspicious. Either way, she was trapped. "Eliza?" Abigail's voice called from the house. "Have you got those eggs?" Relief washed over Eliza. "Come, grandmother," she called back. Then turned to the Reverend. "Excuse me, sir. I'm needed in the house." Without waiting for a response, she darted past him, clutching the basket of eggs in one hand and the silver button in the other. She could feel his eyes on her back as she ran, burning like hot coals. Inside, she found Abigail at the kitchen table, kneading dough for bread. The old woman looked up as Eliza entered, her eyes narrowing at the girl's flushed face and rapid breathing. "What's got you in such a state?" she asked, wiping flour from her hands. "Reverend Stokes is here," Eliza said, setting the basket on the table. "He was watching me by the hen house." Abigail's expression darkened. "Was he indeed, and what business brings him to our door this morning?" As if in answer, a knock sounded at the front door. Abigail straightened, smoothing her apron. "Stay here," she instructed Eliza, then moved with surprising quickness through the house. Eliza heard the door open, heard the Reverend's oily voice greeting her. "Grandmother," heard Abigail's cooler response. Their words were indistinct, but the tone was clear enough. The Reverend pressing, insistent, Abigail firm, and yielding. After what seemed an eternity, the door closed. Abigail returned to the kitchen, her face set in grim lines. "The good Reverend was concerned for your spiritual welfare," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. He wanted to speak with you. About the importance of honesty and the dangers of what was the phrase he used. Yes, unnatural affections. He means the crows, Eliza said quietly. Indeed he does. Abigail resumed her kneading, her movements more forceful than before. I told him you were occupied with household duties and that your father would call upon him if he felt such a conversation was necessary. Eliza's hand tightened around the silver button, still concealed in her palm. One of them came back, she confessed in a whisper. Just now at the hen house. It brought me this. She opened her hand, revealing the button. Abigail stopped her kneading, staring at the small silver object. May I? She asked, extending her floury hand. Eliza placed the button in her grandmother's palm. Abigail examined it closely, turning it over, running her thumb across its surface. This is old, she murmured. Older than me, even see the pattern. Don't make them like this anymore. Where do you think it came from? Eliza asked. Abigail shook her head. Hard to say. Could have been buried in the ground for decades before your crow friend found it. She handed the button back to Eliza. Best keep it hidden, though, and be careful about the birds, child. I know you miss them, but they've brought trouble once already. Eliza nodded, slipping the button into her pocket. But as the day wore on, she found her thoughts returning to it again and again. The crow had brought it to her specifically, had sought her out. After a week of absence to deliver this particular gift. Why? What did it mean? By mid-afternoon, the promised storm had arrived, turning the sky dark as twilight. Rain lashed against the windows, and thunder rolled across the valley like God's own fury. Thomas returned from the fields, soaked to the skin despite his oil coat. The three of them huddled in the kitchen, the warmest room in the house, thanks to the cooking fire that burned throughout the day. As darkness fell, the storm intensified. Lightning split the sky in jagged bursts, illuminating the room in harsh white flashes. Thomas read aloud from the Bible, his deep voice nearly drowned out at times by the crash of thunder. Eliza sat by the fire, half listening to her father's reading. The silver button was in her pocket, and she found herself touching it repeatedly, drawing comfort from its solid presence. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing. A sound almost like voices calling in the night when a particularly violent gust rattled the shutters. Thomas paused in his reading. Never heard a wind like this, he remarked, frowning toward the window. Sounds almost human. It's just the storm, Abigail said, but her voice lacked conviction. She too was listening, her head tilted slightly, her rheumy eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the window. Eliza listened as well, and what she heard made her blood run cold. For beneath the howling of the wind, beneath the crash of thunder and the patter of rain, there was another sound. A chorus of calls, hundreds of them, thousands perhaps, all calling at once. The crows had returned to Ravenbrook. No one in the village slept that night. The storm raged until dawn, and with it came the crows, more than anyone had ever seen, more than seemed possible. They perched on every available surface, their weight-bending branches, their bodies so numerous they seemed to form a living blanket over the village. And they watched through the rain and wind, through the lightning and thunder. They kept their obsidian eyes fixed on the houses of Ravenbrook, on the people huddled inside. When morning came and the storm finally abated, the villagers emerged to find their world transformed. The ground was littered with black feathers, wet and gleaming in the weak sunlight. The air was filled with the sound of cawing, a constant backdrop to the more mundane noises of village life. Thomas Blackwood stood on his porch, surveying the scene with a grim expression. The fields he had so carefully plowed were now churned into mud by the storm. Worse, the crows had descended upon the newly planted corn, pulling up shoots and pecking its seeds. A season's work, undone in a single night. He was not the only one to suffer. Throughout Ravenbrook, reports came of damage, chicken coops raided, gardens destroyed, even items stolen from washing lines or through open windows. And everywhere, crows watched with what seemed like malicious intelligence. A meeting was called at the church. Every adult in the village attended, leaving children under the care of the oldest youths. Eliza, deemed old enough to mind herself, but too young for the meeting, was instructed to stay in the house with strict orders not to venture outside. But from her window, she could see the procession making its way to the church, her father and grandmother among them, walking slowly against the mud that sucked at their boots, and she could see the crows following their progress, perching on the church roof, gathering in the cemetery behind it, like mourners at a funeral. Something was going to happen. Eliza could feel it in the air, in the restless movement of the birds, in the silver button that seemed to grow warm in her pocket. A decision was being made in that church. A judgment rendered, and somehow she knew it concerned her. Unable to bear the waiting, Eliza slipped out of the house. The yard was empty of crows. They had all gone to the church, as if they, too, were attending the meeting. Moving quickly, she made her way through the sodden garden and into the woods beyond. The clearing where she had fed the crows was muddy. But beneath an old oak tree, the ground remained relatively dry. Eliza sat on a fallen log, her back against the rough bark of the tree, and waited. For what? She wasn't sure. But the crows had brought her the button for a reason. They had returned to Ravenbrook for a reason, and she needed to understand why. As she sat turning the silver button over and over in her fingers, a rustle in the undergrowth made her look up. Expecting a crow, she was surprised to see instead a rabbit, a large one with tawny fur, its ears alert, its nose twitching as it regarded her. "Hello," Eliza said softly, careful not to make any sudden movements that might frighten the creature. The rabbit took a hop toward her, then another. It stopped just a few feet away, still watching her with its large liquid eyes. Then, to Eliza's astonishment, it spoke not in words exactly, but in a series of small movements and twitches that somehow translated into meaning in her mind. "They're coming for you," the rabbit seemed to say. "The men with their guns and their hate. They blame you for the birds." A chill ran down Eliza's spine. "Who's coming?" she asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. The rabbit's ears twitched. "The preacher leads them. The father follows. Reluctant but afraid. They will take you to the river." "My father wouldn't hurt me," Eliza protested. But even as she spoke, doubt crept into her heart. Thomas Blackwood was a hard man, a practical man, if he believed his daughter was bringing destruction upon the village. "What should I do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The rabbit hopped closer until it was almost touching her muddy boot. "Follow the crows," it said. "They know the way. They remember." Before Eliza could ask what the rabbit meant, a cacophony of calls erupted from the direction of the village. The rabbit's ears shot up in alarm, and without another sound, it bounded off into the undergrowth, disappearing as suddenly as it had appeared, rising to her feet. Eliza peered through the trees toward Ravenbrook. The church door had opened, and people were spilling out, not in the orderly fashion of a Sunday service, but in a chaotic mass. Voices raised in what sounded like anger or fear. and above them, the crows were circling, their calls growing more frantic by the moment. As Eliza watched, one broke from the flock and flew directly toward the woods, toward her. It was the white, feathered crow. She realized the one that had spoken to her before. It landed on a branch just above her head, fixing her with its obsidian eye. "Run," it seemed to say, the word forming in Eliza's mind with crystal clarity. "Run now." Eliza hesitated only a moment. Then, clutching the silver button tightly in her hand, she turned and ran deeper into the woods, away from Ravenbrook, away from the only home she had ever known. Behind her, she could hear voices calling her name, her father's among them, deep and commanding. But louder still was the sound of the crows, hundreds of them taking flight at once, following her into the forest like a living shadow. Eliza ran until her lungs burned and her legs trembled. The forest grew denser, the undergrowth more tangled, slowing her progress. But she pushed on, guided by the crows that flew ahead, showing her the path through the trees. Eventually, she had to stop, collapsing against the trunk of a massive oak, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The woods were quiet here, the sounds of pursuit lost in the distance. Above, the crows circled lazily as if waiting for her to recover her strength as her breathing steadied. Eliza became aware of her surroundings in a way she hadn't while running. This part of the forest was different. Older somehow, the trees more gnarled, the undergrowth thicker. Moss covered many of the trunks and ferns grew in patches where sunlight managed to penetrate the canopy. But what caught her attention most was a structure half hidden among the trees ahead. A cabin, or what remained of one. Its roof had partially collapsed and vines crawled up its walls, but it was unmistakably man-made. Curious despite her fear, Eliza approached cautiously. The door hung askew on rusted hinges, and windows gaped like empty eye sockets. It had been abandoned for many years, judging by the state of decay. Yet, as she drew closer, Eliza felt a strange sense of familiarity, as if she had seen this place before, perhaps in a dream. The white, feathered crow landed on what remained of the porch railing, watching her with its head cocked to one side. "Is this where you wanted me to come?" Eliza asked it. The crow gave a single call that she somehow understood as affirmation. Taking a deep breath, Eliza stepped onto the porch, wincing as the rotted boards creaked beneath her weight. The crow hopped along the railing, leading her to the door. Inside, the cabin was a single room, its contents long since looted or rotted away. A stone hearth dominated one wall, its chimney still intact. A broken table lay on its side in one corner, and the remains of what might have been a bed frame stood against another wall, but it was what lay in the center of the room that drew Eliza's attention. A trap door, half covered by fallen debris. The crow flew to it, landing on a beam that had collapsed across the door. It pecked at the wood insistently, then looked at Eliza with what could only be described as expectation. Moving carefully across the uneven floor, Eliza began to clear away the debris, branches, leaves, the rotted remains of what might once have been a rug. The trapdoor beneath was surprisingly intact, its wood preserved, perhaps by the debris that had covered it. An iron ring served as a handle, though it was crusted with rust. Eliza grasped the ring and pulled. The door resisted at first, then gave way with a groan of protesting hinges. A cloud of dust billowed up, making her cough and step back. When it cleared, she found herself looking down into darkness, a cellar or storage space beneath the cabin. The white, feathered crow hopped to the edge of the opening and peered down, then looked back at Eliza with that same expectant gaze. Taking the hint, Eliza looked around for something to light her way. Her gaze fell upon a branch near the hearth, wrapped in what appeared to be the remains of an oiled cloth, a torch left behind by whoever had last occupied the cabin. She retrieved it, hoping against hope that the oil might still be flammable after all these years. In her pocket was a small tin of matches, a birthday gift from her father the previous year, with strict instructions to use them only for lighting candles or the kitchen fire. Striking a match against the rough side of the tin, Eliza touched the flame to the cloth-wrapped end of the branch. To her surprise and relief, it caught the oil-soaked fabric, igniting with a whoosh. The torch cast a flickering orange glow across the cabin's interior, pushing back the shadows. Returning to the trapdoor, Eliza held the torch out over the opening. A crude ladder led down into what appeared to be a root cellar, its dirt floor about 8 feet below. Wooden shelves lined the walls, most empty, though a few held what looked like glass jars, their contents long since turned to dust. But it was what stood in the center of the cellar that made Eliza's breath catch in her throat. A wooden chest bound with iron, its surface covered in strange symbols carved into the wood. Even from above, she could see that the chest was ancient, its wood darkened with age, its iron fittings red with rust. The crow gave an insistent call, hopping from foot to foot at the edge of the opening. Taking a deep breath, Eliza began to descend the ladder, holding the torch in one hand and moving carefully to avoid falling. The rungs creaked ominously beneath her weight, but held. When her feet touched the earthen floor of the cellar, Eliza turned to face the chest. Up close, the symbols carved into its surface were even more intricate. Swirls and lines that seemed to form pictures, if she looked at them from the right angle. A bird with outstretched wings, a tree with roots that became snakes, a woman with stars for eyes. The chest's lid was secured with an iron latch, but no lock. With trembling fingers, Eliza lifted the latch and pushed against the heavy lid. It opened with surprising ease, as if the hinges had been recently oiled. Inside lay a book, a massive tome bound in dark leather, its pages yellowed with age. Beside it was a smaller object wrapped in faded red cloth, and scattered around both were dozens of silver buttons identical to the one Eliza carried in her pocket. With a sense of reverence, Eliza lifted the book from the chest. It was heavier than she expected, and when she placed it on the dirt floor and opened it, she found pages covered in handwritten text, a journal or diary written in a flowing, feminine hand. The first page bore a name, Sarah Blackwood. Eliza's heart seemed to stop in her chest. Sarah Blackwood, her mother's name. But her mother had died giving birth to her. How could this book, hidden in an abandoned cabin deep in the woods, bear her name? Unless this had been her mother's cabin, unless her mother had hidden this book here, along with whatever lay wrapped in the red cloth. With shaking hands, Eliza began to read, holding the torch close to the yellowed pages. I, Sarah Blackwood, formerly Sarah Thorne, commit to these pages the truth that I dare not speak aloud. May whoever finds this understand that what I did out of love and fear in equal measure. The entry was dated April 12, 1837, the year before Eliza was born. Thomas knows nothing of my past. Of the gifts that run in my blood, he would not understand. The people of Ravenbrook certainly would not. They call themselves Christians, but their fear of the unknown runs deeper than their faith. Eliza read on, her heart pounding. The journal told a story she had never heard of her mother's family, the Thorns who had lived in these woods for generations before Ravenbrook was founded. Of gifts passed down from mother to daughter, gifts of understanding, of communion with the natural world, of persecution that had driven them deeper into the forest, away from the settlements that sprang up along the frontier. Sarah had been the last of her line, orphaned young and taken in by a family in a town to the east. She had hidden her gifts, pretending to be an ordinary girl. And when she met Thomas Blackwood, a young man with ambition and drive, she had seen a chance for a normal life. But the gifts could not be denied forever. After moving to Ravenbrook as Thomas's wife, Sarah had begun to hear the voices again, the animals speaking to her, sharing their secrets. She had retreated to this cabin built by her grandmother to practice her gifts in secret and to record what she knew, what she had learned. For the daughter she sensed would one day share her abilities. The last entry was dated February 3, 1838, just days before Eliza's birth and her mother's death. The child stirs within me, impatient for the world. I feel her strength, her potential. She will have the gift, stronger perhaps than any in our line. But I fear I will not be there to guide her. The crows have been restless, circling the cabin, watching with knowing eyes. They bring me silver buttons. My grandmother's sigil, her connection to the other world. A warning perhaps or a promise. If I do not survive, know this, my daughter. The crows are your protectors, your messengers. They see what others cannot. They remember what others forget. Trust them. And when the time comes, use what I have left for you. It is your birthright, your power. May it serve you better than it served me. The entry ended there. Eliza sat back on her heels, her mind reeling with revelations. Her mother had been like her, able to hear the animals to understand their speech. It wasn't witchcraft or madness. It was a gift passed down through generations of women. And the crows had known. They had recognized the gift in Eliza, had sought her out, had protected her in their way. The silver buttons were a sign, a connection to her mother and the women who came before her. With reverent hands, Eliza set aside the journal and reached for the cloth-wrapped object that had lain beside it. In the chest. Unwrapping it carefully, she revealed a pendant, a silver crow in flight, suspended from a leather cord. It was exquisitely detailed, each feather distinct. The bird's eye, a tiny black stone that caught the torchlight. As Eliza held it, she felt a surge of something powerful, a connection, a recognition. This had been her mother's. And her grandmother's before that, a symbol of their gift, their bond with the natural world. With trembling fingers, she fastened the cord around her neck, letting the silver crow rest against her chest. It felt warm against her skin, as if alive. A call from above drew her attention back to the trapdoor. The white, feathered crow was still there, watching her with its obsidian eye. But now it seemed different, more than just a bird, a messenger, as her mother had written. A protector. Thank you, Eliza whispered to it. For bringing me here, for showing me the truth. The crow bobbed its head in acknowledgement. Then it spread its wings and took flight, disappearing from view. But Eliza could hear it calling to its brethren outside, a summoning, a rallying cry. Gathering the journal and as many of the silver buttons as she could fit in her pockets, Eliza climbed back up the ladder. The cabin seemed different now, less a place of abandonment and more a sanctuary, a connection to her past, to the women whose blood ran in her veins. Outside, the crows had gathered in the trees surrounding the cabin, hundreds of them watching silently. As Eliza emerged onto the porch, they began to call, their voices rising in a chorus that seemed almost like a greeting or a pledge of allegiance. The white feathered crow descended to perch on her shoulder, its weight surprisingly light. In her mind, Eliza heard its voice clearly now. No longer a series of calls, but words as distinct as if spoken by a human tongue. The men come, it said with fire and hatred, they seek to destroy what they do not understand. Fear clutched at Eliza's heart. My father too. He follows. Though his heart is divided. The preacher leads. His soul is black as sin. Reverend Stokes. Of course it would. Be him with his talk of witchcraft and Satan. His cold eyes and colder heart. But that her father would join such a party. What should I do? Eliza asked, her voice small in the vastness of the forest. The crow's voice in her mind was gentle but firm. What your mother could not. What your grandmother dared not. Stand your ground. Claim your power. We are with you, daughter of Sarah. We remember. We protect. As if an affirmation, the crows in the trees let out a collective call, a sound like thunder rolling across the sky. They took flight as one, circling above the cabin in a living whirlwind of black wings. And in that moment, Eliza felt something shift within her. A recognition, an acceptance. This was who she was. Daughter of Sarah, heir to a line of women who spoke with animals, who understood the language of the wild, not a witch, but something older. Something the village, with its narrow faith, could never comprehend. She clutched the silver crow pendant at her throat, feeling its warmth spread through her body. The journal she held close to her chest, her mother's words a shield against the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. I'm ready, she said, as much to herself as to the crow on her shoulder. Show me what to do. The confrontation came at dusk. Eliza heard them before she saw them. A group of men, crashing through the undergrowth with all the subtlety of a herd of cattle. Torches flickered among the trees, casting long shadows that danced across the forest floor. She stood on the porch of her mother's cabin, the silver pendant gleaming at her throat, the journal tucked safely in the pocket of her dress. The crows had settled around her, on the roof, on the railings, on the ground at her feet. The white-feathered one remained on her shoulder. A constant presence, a voice of guidance in her mind. First through the trees came Reverend Stokes, his black coat, making him seem like a crow himself, a mockery of the real birds that watched his approach with glittering eyes. Behind him came Tobias Fletcher, a rifle clutched in his meaty hands. Then others, men of Ravenbrook, whom Eliza had known all her life, Mr. Miller, whose eggs Mrs. Chambers stole. John Cooper, who had lost his infant son to winter's chill, Samuel Parker, brother to the widow the Reverend visited at night. And finally, Thomas Blackwood. His face a mask of conflicting emotions, fear, anger, confusion, and beneath it all, a father's love wearing with a community's expectations. They stopped at the edge of the small clearing surrounding the cabin, their torches casting a flickering light across the scene. The dilapidated structure, the young girl standing before it, and the hundreds of crows surrounding her like a living mantle. Eliza, Thomas called. His voice strained. Come away from there. Come home. Before Eliza could respond, Reverend Stokes stepped forward, his Bible clutched in one hand like a weapon. See how the devil's minions surround her, he declared, pointing at the crows. See how she commands them. This is no natural power, but witchcraft most foul. She's just a child, Thomas protested. But his voice lacked conviction. A child possessed. The Reverend countered. A vessel for evil. You saw what those birds did to our village, to our crops. This cannot be allowed to continue. As the men argued, Eliza felt a strange calm settle over her. The initial fear had faded, replaced by a certainty, a knowledge of what she must do. The white-feathered crow on her shoulder murmured in her mind, guiding her, reminding her of the power that was her birthright. "I am not a witch," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the clearing. "And these are not the devil's minions. They are crows, creatures of God's making, as I blasphemy," Reverend Stokes hissed. "To claim the Lord would create such an abomination. A child who speaks with beasts, who commands them to do her bidding." "I don't command them," Eliza replied evenly. "I understand them. They understand me. It is a gift passed down through my mother's blood." At the mention of Sarah, Thomas's head snapped up, his eyes widening. "What do you know of your mother?" he demanded. In answer, Eliza withdrew the journal from her pocket, holding it up for him to see. "I know she came here to this cabin built by her grandmother. I know she wrote down her story, her truth, for me to find. I know she had the same gift I have, the gift to hear the voices of animals, to understand their speech." Thomas took a step forward, his face pale in the torchlight. "That's not possible, Sarah." "Never." He trailed off, his certainty faltering. "She never told you," Eliza finished for him. "She was afraid. Afraid of what you would think. Afraid of what the village would do if they knew." "With good reason," Reverend Stokes cut in. "Such powers are an affront to God's natural order. They can come only from Satan himself." "They come from my blood," Eliza countered. "From my mother and her mother before her, back through generations of women who lived in these woods long before Ravenbrook was founded." As she spoke, the crows around her grew restless, shifting on their perches, their calls growing louder. The white, feathered one on her shoulder spread its wings slightly, balancing as it leaned toward her ear. "They fear what they do not understand," it whispered in her mind. "Show them. Make them see." Understanding what the crow meant, Eliza reached into her pocket and withdrew a handful of the silver buttons she had collected from the chest. She held them out, letting them catch the light of the men's torches. "These belong to my grandmother," she said, "and to her mother before her. The crows have been bringing them to me one by one, a reminder of who I am, of the power that is my birthright." A murmur ran through the group of men. Several made the sign of the cross while others gripped their weapons more tightly. "Witchcraft," Reverend Stokes repeated. But there was a tremor in his voice now. The scene before him, the girl surrounded by birds, the ancient cabin, the silver buttons gleaming in the torchlight, had shaken even his rigid certainty. Thomas took another step forward, his eyes fixed on the journal in Eliza's hand. "Let me see that," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Eliza hesitated, looking to the white, feathered crow for guidance. It gave a small nod, almost imperceptible. With slow, deliberate steps, Eliza descended from the porch and approached her father. The crows parting before her like a black sea. When she stood before Thomas, she held out the journal. "It's Mother's story," she said softly. "Her truth. Our truth." Thomas took the book with trembling hands. He opened it, his eyes scanning the first page, recognition flooding his features as he saw his wife's handwriting. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice breaking on the name. "She knew she might not survive my birth." Eliza continued, her voice gentle. "She left this for me to find when I was ready. When the gift manifested, and the birds." Thomas asked, looking up at the crows that surrounded them, at the white, feathered one perched on his daughter's shoulder. "They are her messengers," Eliza explained. "They remember her and those who came before. They led me here to her cabin, to her legacy." "Enough of this," Reverend Stokes's voice cracked like a whip. He strode forward, reaching for the journal. In Thomas's hands. This is blasphemy and witchcraft. The book must be burned, and... The girl, before he could finish, the white, feathered crow launched itself from Eliza's shoulder with a furious cry. It flew directly at the Reverend's face, its talons extended, its beak open. In a screech of rage, the man stumbled backward with a cry of alarm, his arms raised to protect himself. As if this were a signal, the rest of the crows took flight, not attacking, but circling above the clearing in a black whirlwind. Their calls a deafening chorus. The men ducked instinctively, several dropping their torches, which sputtered in the damp earth. In the chaos, Thomas grabbed Eliza's arm, pulling her close. "Is this true?" he demanded, his voice raised to be heard above the noise. "All of it? Your mother? These gifts?" "Yes," Eliza said simply. "I can show you." "I can." "Prove it." Before Thomas could respond, a shot rang out. Tobias Fletcher had raised his rifle and fired at the circling birds. A crow fell, its body tumbling through the air to land with a soft thud at Eliza's feet. Silence fell. Sudden and complete. The crows ceased their calls, though they continued to circle overhead. Thomas's grip on Eliza's arm tightened protectively. Eliza stared down at the fallen crow. Its black feathers split against the earth, a small pool of blood forming beneath it. Something cold and hard formed in her chest. A knot of grief and rage intertwined. The white-feathered crow returned to her shoulder, its voice urgent in her mind. "Now," it said, "show them now your power, your truth." Understanding what she must do, Eliza gently freed herself from her father's grip and knelt beside the fallen bird. She placed her hands on either side of its still form. Closing her eyes, the silver pendant at her throat grew warm, almost hot against her skin. "Return," she whispered. "Return to the sky, to your brothers and sisters. Your time is not yet done." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, beneath her hands, the crow stirred, its wings twitched, its eyes opened. Black beads staring up at her with recognition. With a soft caw, it righted itself, shaking out its feathers as if awakening from sleep. The blood that had pooled beneath it was gone. The wound closed as if it had never been. With a flap of its wings, the crow took flight, rejoining the flock circling above. Gasps and cries of astonishment rose from the men. Reverend Stokes fell to his knees. His Bible clutched to his chest, his face a mask of terror. Tobias Fletcher dropped his rifle as if it had burned him. The others crossed themselves or muttered prayers. Thomas stared at his daughter, his expression a mixture of awe and fear. "How?" he whispered. Eliza rose to her feet, feeling a strange power flowing through her, a connection to the earth beneath her feet, to the crows above, to the legacy of women whose blood ran in her veins. "It's the gift," she said simply. "The power to understand, to heal, to connect, not witchcraft, something older, something true." She turned to face the men of Ravenbrook, these neighbors who had come with torches and guns to drive her out or worse. "I am not your enemy," she declared, her voice ringing clear in the twilight. "Nor are the crows. We are part of these woods, this land. We were here before Ravenbrook was founded. We will be here long after." "Abomination," Reverend Stokes hissed, but the word lacked conviction now. He had seen what Eliza could do. Had witnessed a power beyond his understanding, beyond the rigid confines of his faith. "Life," Eliza corrected gently. "Creation. The same. Power that makes the crops grow, that brings rain to the fields, that guides the seasons in their eternal dance. I am a daughter of these woods, as my mother was before me. I mean no harm to Ravenbrook or its people." She turned to her father, her dark eyes, Sarah's eyes meeting his. "I cannot return to the village," she said softly. "Not now. My place is here in my mother's cabin, learning to use the gifts she left me. But I do not wish to be your enemy, father, nor anyone's." Thomas looked from his daughter to the journal in his hands, to the crows still circling overhead. 12 years of belief, of certainty about who his wife had been, who his daughter was, crumbled in the face of this new reality. "The crops," he said at last, his voice, "the crows destroyed our crops. They were protecting me," Eliza explained. "They sensed the hostility in the village, the suspicion. They reacted as they thought best." She glanced up at the circling birds. "But they can help as well as harm. They can watch for pests, warn of storms, guide hunters to game. If the village will accept me, accept us for what we are." Thomas was silent for a long moment, weighing his daughter's words against a lifetime of belief. Then slowly he nodded. "I cannot speak for all of Ravenbrook," he said carefully, "but I can speak for myself. You are my daughter, Sarah's daughter. Whatever gifts you possess, whatever legacy she left you, they are part of who you are. And he swallowed hard. I would know my daughter, not drive her away in fear." Reverend Stokes rose to his feet, his face contorted with rage. "This is madness," he spat. "The girl is a witch. Her birds agents of Satan. Would you turn your back on God, on your faith for such abomination?" "I turn my back on nothing," Thomas replied, his voice steady now. "Except perhaps your narrow understanding of God's creation, Reverend. My daughter has shown more grace and wisdom today than many who claim to speak for the Lord." A murmur ran through the gathered men, not of agreement necessarily, but of uncertainty. They had come expecting to find a child possessed, a witch in need of exorcism, or worse. Instead, they had found a girl who could speak with birds, who could heal with a touch, who claimed a legacy older than their village. "I'll not be part of this heresy," the Reverend declared, backing away. "Those who stand with God, with a true faith, come with me now. Leave this place of darkness." He turned and strode into the trees, his black coat flapping like wings. After a moment's hesitation, several men followed, Tobias Fletcher among them, his face a mask of superstitious fear, but others remained, Thomas Blackwood, chief among them. They stood uncertain in the gathering darkness, watching the girl and her crows, trying to reconcile what they had seen with what they had been taught to believe. "It grows late," Eliza said gently. "You should return to the village before full dark. These woods can be treacherous to those who don't know them." "And you?" Thomas asked. "Will you be safe here?" Eliza looked up at the crows, at the white, feathered one that had returned to her shoulder. "I am never alone," she said simply. "The crows watch over me," and she hesitated, then continued. "Grandmother should join me. She understands better than most, and her knowledge would be valuable as I learn to use my gifts." Thomas nodded slowly. "I'll speak with her, and I'll return tomorrow with supplies to repair the cabin. If this is to be your home, it should at least keep out the rain." A small smile curved Eliza's lips. The first genuine smile she had given her father in longer than either could remember. "Thank you," she said softly, as the men of Ravenbrook departed, making their way carefully through the darkening woods by torch light. Eliza stood before her mother's cabin, surrounded by her crows. The white, feathered one nuzzled against her cheek, its voice a comforting presence in her mind. "You have chosen a difficult path," it said. "Not all will accept what you are, what you can do." "I know," Eliza replied. "But it's the true path, my mother's path. I won't hide anymore." The crow made a sound that might have been approval. "Then we will stand with you, daughter of Sarah." As we stood with her and her mother before her, the line continues. The gift endures. Eliza touched the silver pendant at her throat, feeling its warmth, a connection to her mother, to all the women who had come before. "Yes," she said. "The gift endures." And so it came to pass that Eliza Blackwood made her home in the cabin in the woods, learning the ways of her mother's legacy, developing the gifts that were her birthright. Abigail joined her, bringing wisdom and practical knowledge accumulated over 7 decades of life. Thomas visited often, gradually coming to terms with who his wife had been, who his daughter was becoming. He brought supplies, helped repair the cabin, and in time brought news of a changing attitude in Ravenbrook. For Eliza kept her promise. The crows that had once plagued the village became its guardians instead, warning of approaching storms, driving away pests that would destroy crops, even leading hunters to game when food was scarce. And when illness struck, Eliza would come, her silver pendant gleaming at her throat, her hands bringing healing where the doctor's remedies failed. Some in the village never accepted her, viewing her gifts with suspicion and fear. Reverend Stokes preached against her until his dying day, warning of witchcraft and damnation. But others came to see her as a blessing, a connection to powers older than their understanding, but no less divine for that. And the crows, they remained her constant companions, her messengers, her protectors. They built their nests in the trees surrounding her cabin, their numbers growing with each passing year. They brought her silver buttons found in the forest, connecting her to her past, reminding her of who she was and where she came from. In time, tales spread beyond Ravenbrook. Stories of a girl who spoke with crows, who could heal with a touch, who knew secrets the trees whispered on the wind. Some dismissed these as frontier superstition. Others traveled great distances to seek her wisdom, her healing powers. Eliza received them all with the same quiet grace, neither confirming nor denying the more fantastic elements of the tales told about her. She simply did what she had always done, listened to the voices that others could not hear, and acted with the compassion and wisdom that were as much her inheritance as the gift itself. And if in later years travelers reported a strange sight in the Kentucky wilderness, a cabin surrounded by crows, inhabited by a woman with eyes dark as midnight and a silver pendant at her throat. Well, such stories were common on the frontier, tales to be told around campfires, to be believed or disbelieved according to one's inclination, but those who had lived in Ravenbrook knew the truth. They had seen the girl who fed the crows. They had witnessed her power, her connection to something beyond ordinary understanding. And when many decades later, a team of surveyors came upon the ruins of a village in the Kentucky hills, they found it littered with beaks and bones, the remnants of countless crows that had lived and died in that place, guarding the memory of a girl who had once called them friends. That village was Ravenbrook, and its story, like the crows that once watched over it, endures. A whisper on the wind, a tale passed down through generations, a reminder that there are powers in this world beyond our understanding. Gifts that connect us to the wild heart of creation in ways both terrible and beautiful. The wind still whispers through the Kentucky woodlands, carrying tales long forgotten by time. And somewhere among the ancient trees, the crows still gather, watching, remembering, waiting for the next daughter of Sarah, to awaken to her gifts. Welcome to the Ghastly Journal. Until next time, sleep well if you can.